There are a handful of players you can consider must-haves in 2023. Actually, two handfuls. I'm talking 10 players. These players go far too late based on their upside and projection for this year. So let's break down the top 10 must-have players you need to draft now in fantasy. And the number 10 player in this list is Chuba Hubbard, who right now, the Carolina Panthers backup running back, currently goes in round 16 of drafts as the RB55. But he's actually one of the best handcuffs in fantasy. Let's discuss. Look, Hubbard was quietly great last year. He ranked 6th in yards per touch. Every time he touched the ball, he got 5.8 yards per touch, more than Jonathan Taylor and Austin Eckler. Now, of course, he's not the starter, but that's why he goes in round 16. Check this out. Miles Sanders is the obvious running back one for the Panthers after signing a great deal this offseason. But in terms of RB2 touches, there's not a lot of competition for Hubbard. With Deontay Foreman gone, it leaves Raheem Blackshear, who was 77th in running back efficiency last year, and Spencer Brown, who has 9 career carries. And let's not forget, Hubbard is still just 24 years old. He actually just turned 24 this summer, so there's a lot of upside left and juice in his legs. And let's not forget how productive he was in college. In one season, he had over 2,000 yards rushing, 200 receiving yards, nearly 2,300 total yards, and 21 touchdowns. Now, one more thing. Miles Sanders is often injured. As you can see right here on Draft Shark's injury tool, if we go back to 2020 when he entered the league and you just scroll, there's a bunch of different knee injuries on here, ankle injuries, as a running back has, but 9 injuries in his first 3 years in the league. He's missed 20% of his games, which means Hubbard has a chance to start a couple of games this year, and right now he goes in round 16 after Wan'Dale Robinson, Isaiah Hodges, right around Kenny Gainwell. I'd rather have Hubbard. So he's the number 10 player who's a must-have this year. Now let's get to the number 9. And we head to Green Bay and we look at a rookie wide receiver, Jayden Reed, who goes far too late in drafts. I mean, Reed goes in round 17 of fantasy drafts. He's not taken in a lot of them as the 70th wide receiver, which is strange to me because according to the OTA camp reports, Jayden Reed is already getting the healthy portion of first team reps, most of that in the slot. But Reed's known for being a versatile player in college. He played all 3 wide receiver positions: the slot, the X outside receiver position, and the Y outside receiver position. And there's more good news because Reed was great in college. He had 39% of his team's touchdowns, 25% of the team's targets, and earned 36% of their offensive production. And outside of him being a second-round pick who secured the capital and he's talented, he just doesn't have a lot of competition. That's why he's already starting. You have guys on this team like Romeo Doubs, who last year was 70th at getting open. You have Dontavian Wicks, who's a 5th-round rookie, and Samori Toure has just 5 career catches. And one more thing, Reed isn't a household name because Michigan State is a run-first offense and his quarterback ranked 100th in quarterback efficiency and accuracy last year. So just take Reed before your buddies do. Now for the number 8 must-have player. And that would be Rondale Moore, who was starting to break out last year before his injury. Let's get into it. In 2021, Rondale Moore wasn't used much. He played just 47% of the snaps. He rarely ever went over 50% of the snaps. But then everything changed in 2022. Rondale put on some weight. He had a great camp, and look at his snap share here. 90%. Everything is basically over 90%. He played 94% of the snaps in his healthy games. And during this time, he actually averaged 14.1 fantasy points on 8.5 targets per game. Moore was a top 12 wide receiver during this time, earning more points per game than guys like Chris Godwin. And if I continue to scroll here, you'll see Mike Evans, Chris Olave, all these big names, DJ Moore, DK Metcalf. He was earning more points per game than all of them. But people just forgot about him because of the injury. And now, of course, there are concerns heading into this year. The big one being his quarterback situation, with Kyler tearing his ACL late last year. Kyler's probably going to miss at least half the season, which leaves him with Jeff Driscoll, David Blough, Clayton Tune, who might actually be in line to start. He's a later round rookie for this year, but was productive in college. So none of this is great news, but it's already baked into where Rondale goes. He produced last year as a top 12 wide receiver when healthy, but now he goes in the 12th round. More specifically, he goes as the wide receiver 60 after Romeo Doubs, who's a wide receiver 3 on his team and not efficient. Jonathan Mingo, who might be the wide receiver 4 on his team to start camp. So grab Rondale Moore before he becomes like an 8th or a 9th round pick, and then get this number 7 must-have player. And that man's name is Cam Akers, who right now in drafts is currently going as the 22nd running back off the board, which is strange based on how last year ended. Check this out. Over his final 6 games for the Rams last year, Cam Akers averaged 18 fantasy points per game. His total yardage was 102 yards, and his total touches, his carries, and his receptions, 19.2 per game. This is kind of hard to believe, but during that time, he was the running back 4 in fantasy football. Only McKinnon, who was getting lucky with touchdowns, Austin Eckler and Christian McCaffrey were ahead of him in fantasy points. And this was with a bad offense. I mean, Baker Mayfield was starting at times. There was no Matt Stafford. There was no Cooper Kupp. It was hard for them to move the ball and get in the red zone, and he was still producing. And just a reminder, Cam Akers to start last year was coming off of an Achilles tear. He actually returned in like record timing the previous year for the postseason. You can see right here. Now, the Achilles injury usually takes 2 years to regain full explosiveness, but Akers was actually looking 100% towards the end of last year, and you could see Sports MD analysis post on Twitter right here says that it's usually a 2-year dip, but Akers last year fit the criteria for a good comeback. Young, high draft capital, and that's what we saw. And now this is important because your friends are still undervaluing him, likely based off of just the early season performance last year. Even though he has an extremely weak competition, I mean, not much was added this offseason. You still have Kyren Williams, who was smaller, slow, and inefficient last year. They took a 6th-round running back in Zach Evans, and Ronnie Rivers has 9 career carries. Now, given the new draft capital, I would say Zach Evans is his biggest threat, but he's not a threat. Evans is only 208 pounds. He only has 30 catches in 27 career college games, and he has just league average burst and speed. Basically, he's an average running back where Cam Akers is well above average, so take him in round 7. Now for the number 6 must-have player in 2023. I give you Antonio Gibson, who is now a major value. He currently goes in fantasy drafts in round 9, around Tyler Boyd and Allen Lazard, and this is a major mistake. Let's not sugarcoat this. Gibson last year is coming off of his worst efficiency year in the NFL. On the ground, just 64th in rushing efficiency, and then yards per touch, factoring in his receiving ability, 36. However, he dealt with injury basically all of last year. He ended up tweaking his hamstring in June in camp last year. That lingered for about a month or two, and then during the season in November, he fractures his foot and plays the final 4 to 5 games on a fractured foot and a knee sprain. So this likely affected his overall production. Now, despite this poor efficiency, he was still more efficient than his teammate Brian Robinson, who was 53rd in overall yards per touch. But Robinson, again, before the season started, we've talked about this, was shot, which likely affected his efficiency. However, we have new information that the Commanders are giving Antonio Gibson RB1 workload in camp. And let's not forget how good of a receiver this guy is. Last year, only 2 running backs had a better grade according to Pro Football Focus in the receiving game. Christian McCaffrey, makes sense, and Amir Abdullah. But then Antonio Gibson was next, and he was ahead of guys like Joe Mixon, Leonard Fournette, and Austin Eckler. And another reminder, Gibson was a receiver coming out of college. His final year, 38 catches for 735 yards. And then he shows up to the combine, and according to the player profiler workout metrics, he logs a speed score of 99th percentile, top 1% of all time, at a crazy weight of 228 pounds. So when I see that combination, my mind starts to turn, and here's your takeaway. Gibson has the running back cheat codes for fantasy. He's a great pass catcher and has the size to earn red zone touches. Look, even if Gibson splits some of the workload with Brian Robinson, he's still a steal as the 35th running back off the board. So now we're in the top 5 players you must draft this year right now, and we're going to go to a wide receiver. And I give you the Buccaneers wide receiver Chris Godwin, who, look, he has fallen down draft boards after this offseason because Tom Brady retired in February, and Godwin has played 49% of his career games with Brady. Now, here's how it went. In these games, Godwin averaged 15.9 points, 8.4 targets, and 71 receiving yards. He was a top 12 wide receiver during this time, but now he has a new situation because Baker Mayfield will be his quarterback in 2023. And last year, Baker was just 27th in true completion percentage and only averaged 180 yards per game. However, this is important. Baker was pressured on 60 of his throws. That's about 20% of his passes last year, which surely affected his accuracy and probably in general his comfortability in the pocket. Believe it or not, Baker might be a good fit for Godwin because he loves targeting his slot wide receivers. And last year, Chris Godwin was tied with Christian Kirk for the most slot receptions in the NFL with 74, and Godwin was 4th in slot snaps. And not only that, but Godwin is still in his prime. He was top 10 in targets earned last year, 6th in yards after the catch, and top 15 versus man coverage. Take this fella in round 5. He goes after pretty often Brandon Ayuk, guys like J.K. Dobbins and Michael Pittman, but he's a much better option than all of them. Okay, so now we're getting into the elite players in terms of their value for fantasy this year. You need to draft them. Number 4. Hello, Isaiah Pacheco, the Kansas City Chiefs running back, and right now in drafts, he goes in round 7 after guys like Dameon Pierce and DeAndre Swift, and this is a mistake because Pacheco is the RB1 for Patrick Mahomes, a role that averages 1.3 touchdowns per game. And look, as a rookie last year, Pacheco, he played the final 9 games as the primary RB, and he averaged 83 total yards and 12.1 fantasy points. Now, this is strong production for a 7th round rookie, but it's not even the most impressive part. The most impressive part is this right here. In the 2 most important games, this is the game logs for the AFC Championship and Super Bowl. Pacheco, 25 touches. The next closest running back, Jerick McKinnon, with 8. Translation, in their most important game, they trusted Pacheco, the 7th round rookie. And to show even more trust in him, Kansas City had 7 draft picks and spent 0 on the running back position. Pacheco's current competition is guys like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who he already beat out last year, Jerick McKinnon, who's 31 years old, and then Deneric Prince, who's an undrafted free agent. He's a talented player, but again, an undrafted rookie. So expect RB1 usage for Pacheco in arguably the league's best offense. Now we slide into the top 3 must-have players. And for number 3, we're going to a guy that I can't stop drafting, and Kenneth Walker, who now goes in round 5 of drafts. Look, he's sliding down draft boards because the Seahawks in the second round of the draft took the UCLA running back Zach Charbonnet. And this has led to your buddies just quite simply overreacting, because Walker became the starter in week 6 last year, and from this point on, he led the NFL in broken tackle rate, averaged 15.9 fantasy points, and earned 20.6 touches per game. That is top 10 running back usage, and it resulted in him being the number 6 running back in fantasy points during that stretch. So here's my question: why would Seattle stop using him if he was this efficient and productive? I think the actual answer, and this is why he's a value to me, is they won't. Look, Zach Charbonnet securing second round draft capital does mean something. He's going to be involved. There's no denying that this dude is a better pass catcher than Kenneth Walker. Walker never had this type of production in college, a 37 reception and even a 24 reception season. But Kenneth Walker did catch 27 passes last year, and that's not anything to ride home about. It actually just shows you that he was a number 6 fantasy producer despite not even having any receptions. And now we don't need him to produce like a top 6 pick. We need him to produce like a top 20 running back in round 5 to pay off. Go get him. And also get the number 2 must-have player in fantasy. And he was almost number 1. It is very close, but it is David Montgomery, who currently goes in round 8 of fantasy drafts, despite averaging over 1,250 yards the last 3 years when you look at his rushing plus receiving yards. So David Montgomery is now a Lion. He signed a 3-year deal worth $18 million. $11 million of that is guaranteed, the second best RB deal this offseason, which means the Lions are actually incentivized to use him, but there is one clear concern. With their first pick in the draft, the 12th overall pick, they took the Alabama running back Jahmyr Gibbs. And this is a concern for Montgomery because Gibbs was the best pass-catching running back in the class. I mean, look at this, a 44 reception season, 35 reception season, going over 400 receiving yards each of the past 2 years. In college, this is elite. But the good news for Montgomery is Gibbs is small. He's just 199 pounds and likely won't see red zone work. And this man, Jamal Williams, is now a New Orleans Saint, so he leaves behind his red zone role from last year, which saw him earn 45 touches inside the 10-yard line, the most in the NFL, actually 55% more than anybody else. And this translated to Williams seeing 17 touchdowns, and now he's gone, and Montgomery is arguably, and I'd say he is, a better player. So draft David Montgomery before your friends do. Now, before we get to the number 1 must-have guy, I'd like to ask you, do you want to win your fantasy league? Because if so, the Fantasy Blueprint is a risk-free way to do that. It has all the tools you need to do that. Win your league and beat your buddies, like my top 255 on the screen right now with my tiers and my ADP values. You can get it by simply clicking the link in the description below and following the 2 quick steps. And now this is important. If you don't make your fantasy playoffs this year, just let me know and I'll refund your minimum deposit of $5 to $10 depending on when you're watching this, whatever the cost of the guide is. It'll be risk-free for you. So go grab your Fantasy Blueprint down below for 2023. Now let's get into a couple of honorable mentions. These guys just missed the list. There's 2 of them. The first one is Sam Howell. He is the late round quarterback you want. Look, pretty simply put, this guy has the rushing upside. His last year at college, over 800 yards. That's 70 yards per game. And he has the weapons to have success. We talked about Antonio Gibson earlier as a pass catcher. Then he has 3 strong pass catchers in McLaurin, Dotson, and Samuel who can easily get him yards after the catch. And then there's Ty Chandler, the Vikings backup running back. He was a 5th round pick last year, and he was productive in college, having over 1,300 total yards between his rushing and receiving his last year, and he has elite speed. His only competition for backfield touches will be Kenny Ngamu, who's a special teams player, and Dwayne McBride, who's a 7th round running back, and he's not a pass catcher. He's basically a big, bulky downhill runner, which doesn't fit well with Alexander Mattison. So take those guys as well in your drafts. They are honorable mentions here, but now let's get to the number 1 must-have player. And I give you a name that you remember from early last year, the second-year Jets running back Breece Hall, because he was an absolute superstar over his first 4 career starts. He averaged 122 total yards, 19.7 fantasy points, and 18.8 touches per game. This put him tied with Derrick Henry for top 5 fantasy points during that stretch, again, as a rookie. All right, then things didn't go as well. In week 7, he actually, his first 3 touches in this game went for 72 yards and a touchdown, but his 4th touch led to an injury. And of course, it was a brutal injury. He ended up tearing his ACL in meniscus. This isn't great. It ended his season, but for this year, he's pushing him down draft boards, and that's making him a huge value. Because as our friend Sports MD Analysis on Twitter points out, the average running back takes 10 months to return from this injury, and week 1 would be 11 months, meaning that Breece Hall is going to be ready in August. And he also adds on that Breece Hall is likely not going to see a performance dip because he's young, he has 96 percentile athleticism, and he was a high draft pick. So Hall goes in round 3, but we believe he'll be ready for week 1, and now his offense is improved. Because according to PFF, Pro Football Focus, the Jets passing offense was 32nd, dead last in the NFL last year, which led to less red zone drives and less touchdown opportunities for Hall. But of course, they traded for Aaron Rodgers this offseason, so we can expect them to at least be better than worse, probably closer to average or above average, which means more red zone drives for Breece Hall and touchdowns. As a 3rd round pick, he is the number 1 must-have player you need to draft right now. Now, if you want to see 13 more players who are just going undervalued, usually in the later rounds of drafts, and this is where you find some sneaky league winners, well, check out this beautiful video right here. And make sure you hit the subscribe button before you go, you beautiful people. I enjoy making these videos for you, and these videos will help you stay ahead of your buddies.